Welcome to Forever Fierce. I'm Catherine Grace O'Connell. Many of you may be aware of an incident that happened back in March at a Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within event. A 55-year-old woman named Nanine McCool stood up and confronted Tony on what she believed were his misperceptions and misunderstandings of the MeToo movement. I want to be very upfront here. I've been a fan of Tony Robbins for years. I have his books, watched many of his movies. The week before, I posted his life story on my Facebook page. I am also a MeToo. We reached out to Tony's team for a comment, and they responded that they'd already made their public comments and they had nothing further to add. And with that, I'd like to welcome Nanine McCool to our show today. Welcome, Nanine. Delighted to have you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So we're all watching this video that's gone viral now, and all of a sudden, you're a woman in this giant arena of 12,000 people, and before you know it, you have a microphone in your hands, and you are in a situation confronting Tony Robbins. How did that happen?
So it was the first day of the conference. It's a 4-day event, and he's a storyteller. Tony Robbins is a storyteller. So he was telling a story about Steve Wynn. And I didn't know who Steve Wynn was. So I was trying to figure out where he was going with the story and what life, lesson he was trying to teach. But he segued from talking about Steve Wynn and what a great guy he was and everything he'd accomplished into talking about the Me Too movement. He had mentioned the Me Too movement earlier in the day, and I didn't like what he said, but I had sort of let it go. I guess, you go to something like this and you take the good and you leave the rest. But this time he essentially, and I'm paraphrasing because I really, I don't have, this isn't on the video and I have to go from memory, but essentially what I remember him saying was something to the effect that the Me Too movement was being used by women who wanted, for significance. They were trying to make themselves significant by refusing to let go of their victimhood and accusing men of abuse, which, as if you spoke to them, wasn't really abuse. And I literally do not remember standing up. I just was sitting there in my chair, squirming at what he was saying and cringing. And then the next thing I remember, I was up and I was on my feet yelling, "You don't get it. You got it wrong." And somewhere in the middle of that, I suddenly came back to myself and thought, "Oh my God, what are you doing? Sit down." But Tony Robbins couldn't hear me. He was way across the stadium. I was yelling to get his attention, not in anger, but that he was very far away from me. And I don't think he actually heard me. But he must wear an earpiece, and he has team members throughout, and one of them must have told him because he whipped around just as I was about to sit down, and then there was a person standing there with a microphone, and they handed it to me. And that's not on the video because obviously nobody would have thought what was coming next and wouldn't have had a chance to have that going.
So in the next moment, you have a microphone in your hand. You have Tony Robbins, he's not a small man, he's an imposing presence, walking up to you. So, and you're about to sit down. You really had an intention of just like, okay, wait a minute. But then there's this inner experience happening. So we're watching this outer experience, but what's going on in the inside?
Well, that initial part isn't on the video because, I apparently just popped up out of my chair and I don't remember doing it. So when I was actually just beginning to sit down, he whirled around from across the arena and he said something to the crowd. The way I remember it was something to the effect of, "Oh, great, I've been wanting to have this conversation." And then there was someone handing me the mic. So I took the mic and at that point I was thinking, oh, well, okay, good. Well, this is Tony Robbins and I'm going to learn something from this. But as he walked over to me from far away, he's getting closer, there was something in the way that he was walking towards me that sort of made me think, "Ooh, I think he's angry." But I just told myself, well, this is Tony Robbins. He's a big guy. He's getting bigger as he gets closer. Wow, look how big he is. But that that initial exchange, which isn't on the video, he got, I was in the middle of the row, and so he was probably 5 or 6, maybe 8 chairs away from me, and I thought that we were going to be able to talk, but as soon as I said, I think you're misunderstanding the MeToo movement, he started talking again, and he walked away and started with the crowd. And I think that's when the video starts, when he's walking back to me and he asks what my name is.
And you shared with me off camera, which I'd really like to go into this experience. You were in MeToo multiple times from what you shared.
Like most women.
Like most
we have
women.
lots of MeToo things to share.
Absolutely. So there's a part of you, you said there's sort of an inner dialogue going on inside of you.
Well, I was nervous, obviously, at first, and where that video starts, and he does give me a chance to speak again, and I sort of repeat myself. I think you're misunderstanding the MeToo movement. And in that moment, a lot of women cheered, and I hadn't expected that. And but I was looking at him when I said it, and the women cheered, and he looked angry to me. I saw anger pass across his face, and so that was sort of a red flag for me right away. I wasn't fully triggered then, but here's a big guy, and I've made him angry. So I said, I just want you to know I love you, Tony, because I'm a triggered woman who's trying to say, okay, let me placate this large man who, I've made angry, because that's what we're kind of conditioned to do. But then he said, I don't feel threatened at all. Thank you. You're being, he was quite kind to me from that moment. And then I was about to sit down, thinking we were done.
Not even close.
And no, and then he said, now this is when he said, well, come here. And I said, I remember this distinctly, because I was like halfway into my seat, and he said, come here. And I was like, who, me? I was like, why are you calling me over? And so then he called me out in the aisle, and I really had no clue what we were going to do. It was, and
I don't know if he did either.
Yeah, but I think, people talk about the video, and they have a reaction to the video. And for me, it's surreal to listen to people talk about the video, because their experience is so different than my firsthand experience. And when I stepped out into that row, and he had backed off a little bit, to let me out of the row, and then I turned with the microphone, and he stepped up to me, like really right here, and I'm like this, because I'm a tall woman like you.
You are a tall woman.
And I still, he blocks out the sun. He's huge, and I triggered then. That was it. He was angry. He was looking down at me, scowling at me. I felt his anger, and I immediately triggered, to my childhood, where there was a lot of violence in my home. So
part of you felt afraid.
Oh, it was. I was experiencing all. I don't know. For me, a trigger is that I'm experiencing all these emotions from something that's happened long ago. It's an old trauma, but I'm emotionally back there. Rationally, my brain is aware that I'm okay. I'm not about to die, but emotionally, what I'm experiencing is this overwhelming fear and just lots of things going on, which are demanding a response from me, and I'm doing my best not to respond, because it's not congruent with where I am.
And what's so fascinating when you speak of congruent, outside looking in, for me, a woman with PTSD, and me too, I felt you had complete and total control and command. You didn't seem like a woman who was triggered.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, though. Don't we learn that, though, as women, that we have to manage our emotions? And probably one of the things that I've become very good at is compartmentalizing, as I think a lot of women have to learn how to do in this world. So, yes, while all of my energy, it's interesting, I don't remember all of it, because I was so focused on trying to manage that internal response that a lot of my thought, my mental energy was going to managing that and having that argument. You're okay. You're not going to die. You're in a arena with 12,000 witnesses. He's not going to hurt you. This emotional response is not it's not really where you are. So I've learned to do it. I think a lot of women learn how to keep that facade up because out in the real world, when you're dealing with someone who's triggering you, you know that the minute you show weakness, you're in trouble. So you have to keep up that, let them know that you're okay and you're in control. But because if you're standing in front of a predator who's deliberately trying to trigger you,
they feed off of that.
They feed off of it.
They can utilize that in their
yes. So I think it's almost instantaneous that women have to learn, and over time, how to manage their responses. And I've had a lot more time than some women.
Well, and that's what
I'm older.
Yeah, exactly. The beauty of midlife is that you said, on the phone. What did you say if you were 20?
I don't know that I would have been able to do it because there's no substitute for time and experience to teach you how to manage yourself and manage your boundaries. There's
no question.
No substitute.
So we'll take it from that moment. Now you've got Tony Robbins. You've had the microphone moment, the exchange. Now he's asking you to come with him. So what happens from there? And again, from your personal experience, we see one thing on the video. What's your experience like?
Well, I was so triggered. It's so funny because I can go right back there because that's how powerful it was. And he said, put your fist up. I didn't know what he was doing. Apparently he does this at a lot of his events, but since I'd never been to one, I didn't know where he was going. So I put my fist up like this, thinking that's what he wanted. So he took my wrist and he turned it this way. And then he put his massive wrist up to mine. It's really big. And I don't remember who pushed first, but I think instinctively when someone does that, you think that what you're looking for is a balance of power. Like you're going to push and they're going to push and you're going to find a balance. Oh no, that's not what we were looking for. He's there. It was like pushing against a locomotive. And that was another moment for me where, and I think this is really difficult for some men to understand, that in that moment where I started to push against him and I had there was no give. Like he just kept coming. And I knew viscerally in that moment that this is a man who could kill me. Like he literally could take my life if he wanted to. And that of course triggered me even worse because it's hard to explain what that's like. We all want to believe we're a badass, right? Like
absolutely.
Bring it, huh?
Right? Exactly.
Bring it.
But there are those moments.
But the reality is that, and I think for women who who physically attacked and raped, for them, that is already a reality for them. They now know. As an adult woman, to have to confront in that moment that this is a man who could kill me, that all the stuff I tell myself to give myself courage to go out on the street, to just go to wherever, I can handle myself. Against someone like him, I would not. He would kill me if he wanted to, right?
No question. So let me ask you, this is a man whose whole world is based upon self-development, personal development, empathy, compassion, empowerment, not using anger. Was there an alignment? Do you think he heard you or was really listening to you? Was he using you as a prop? Tell me about that experience. Was there a major disconnect between the public persona of Tony Robbins and what you experienced in that moment?
Yeah, I don't. I think, obviously, I don't know what was in Tony Robbins' head, but from my perception, he was triggered. There was something that was. I don't know that he was really seeing me or responding to me. I feel like there was something else going on. He seemed genuinely angry, but not necessarily at me. It's somehow what I represented to him in that moment. But that's my perception. When he started the pushing exercise, I was really triggered, and it was a lot for me to manage mentally. But my rational brain was saying, well, this is okay. This is Tony Robbins, and he's going to there's something empowering about this. He's going to teach you something. So I was, going with it. I do believe that, Tony Robbins teaches that. You have to be willing to get outside your comfort zone. So I was way outside my comfort zone, but I was willingly there. I don't blame Tony Robbins for triggering me. That how could he know that? And you never know what a trigger is for someone, right? So you can't live your life worried about triggering people. Maybe he has a greater obligation because of what he holds himself out to be. But I don't blame him for triggering me. But the reality is I was so triggered, and I was still trying very hard to say, okay, we'll just go with it, and this is going to go somewhere well. I had faith. I had faith.
Yeah, and the faith is obviously the strength and the fierceness that allowed you to get up and stand up. That was a big part of that.
I think it's real important to point out that that I wasn't really in any danger. I think I'm in a room full of 12,000 people. Tony Robbins is not going to harm me, physically not harm me, and he has no power over my life. I don't work for him. I don't, there's nothing he could do to me. Based on what he did and said in there, I worry about he talked about how 70% of his people that work for him are women. And to me, I was very concerned after that was over for those women and the message that he sent based on his interaction with me, because they do have something to worry about.
And as we shared before this, Tony Robbins, what he does is consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously helps to influence people's minds. So in that moment, what did you see being, what was your experience? How was he influencing those minds and those 12,000 people there and all these people that are going to be seeing it after that?
Well, in the moment, I was completely oblivious to the crowd because I was so focused on not losing my mind.
Since you watched it after that?
I've only watched it twice, and I've not enjoyed either experience. So I think the message he sent to me in that moment, which was so disturbing to me, was first the pushing exercise where he said, you're trying to tell me that pushing back makes you safer, and I'm telling you all it does is make people angry. And he said that, I was thinking the pushing exercise was going to go somewhere positive, and he said that, and I remember he was still talking after he said that, and I was struggling to come to terms with that message, like, wait, no. And then he launched into the discussion about the attractive woman. And so my overtaxed brain, I'm like, okay, wait, what is he saying? And I'm thinking, almost immediately, this cannot be going where I think it's going. And then it did. He couldn't, his powerful, wealthy friend couldn't hire the attractive woman, because she was too much of a risk. And that was one of those moments that I remember very clearly, because he shocked me right back into the moment. And I was like, I was just shocked that this was coming out of Tony Robbins' mouth, and that his message was, there was so much wrong with that message. You can't hire the attractive woman because she's such a risk. It was just, everything about it was wrong. And I was shocked that he was saying that. And I knew in that moment that he really didn't get it, that he really was lost when it came to MeToo.
Did you feel this wasn't, an oops moment? This was a belief system of Tony Robbins pouring out in that stadium.
I think Tony Robbins said, he said what a lot of men in those circles that he's in think and say amongst themselves, but don't say out loud in public. I absolutely think that he did us a service in saying what he said, because I believe that's how he sees it. I believe that is his true perception, and that's what a lot of men, powerful men, really think about the Me Too movement.
I believe there's no question about that. That's certainly what we experienced. What I experienced outside in was seeing something that felt very dark. And then there was this light, which was you coming in and taking a stand. And so this moment happened. You basically left that stage and started walking back to your seat. What was that like? So walk us back through that process of getting back to your seat, and what happened?
So at the end, when he was finished, and he sort of, he kisses your hand when he's done. He does that to all the women. It's a little unusual. I think he means it well. But anyway, I'm walking back, and I'm feeling very foolish, and I'm sort of in a daze because I've got all these emotions going. But I'm thinking, why did I stand up? Why did I do this thing? But as I get back to my seat, I had been sitting in the middle of a row, and if you're at an event, from the start, you start sharing with the people around you. You're high-fiving, you're hugging, you're sharing different parts of your life. I'd shared that I was married, happily married, and other people had shared different things. And these people we had sort of a little bit bonded. So as I get back to my seat, it really felt like everybody sort of like pulled away from me. But with the exception of, I sat down in my seat, and there was like 2 rows behind me before there was a path for people to walk. And as I was sitting in my seat trying to pretend like I was just fine, someone tapped me on the shoulder from behind, and I turned around, and there was a woman standing behind me, and I will not forget her ever. I still see her face. And she was in tears, and she said, "Thank you so much. You fucking rock. I will never forget you. I lost my whole fucking career over shit like this." And she turned around and walked off. I couldn't even get to her. But it was so powerful in that moment that I knew I wasn't alone. And I think I had forgotten about the women cheering for me at the initial part. And she brought them back to me and reminded me that I wasn't alone, and that, that there were a lot of women who had my back in that arena. And it kept me there. I was thinking of leaving when I was sitting there. I was thinking, how can I get out of here and have nobody notice that I'm leaving? Because I felt like I was still sort of, being examined and scrutinized. It was surreal. But I remember her, and I probably will never forget her because she was so important to me in that moment.
And I think that's the opportunity that we have. One woman taking a stand can bring all these other women and these stories and these people together. So after that experience, were you aware of what was going on in the crowd? Were you aware of basically, you swayed an entire crowd over to your side?
I don't know if I got the whole crowd.
Well, okay, you swayed a large percentage, let's just say. Outside looking in, it was a very powerful experience. Did anyone from Tony Robbins' team come up to you? Did anyone share that experience with you?
I didn't notice the crowd while I was up there. Like I said, I was just focused on not losing my mind. And but the next day, I made a conscious choice to continue with the program. And the next day, at a break, one of his team, Tony, he approached me, and he said that, I think he said he was one of the trainers, the master trainers. And he said to me, we all noticed that yesterday, that Tony lost the crowd when he was talking to you, and we were amazed by it. I really didn't know what he was talking about because, my experience at that moment was so much about, I had to tune out the crowd, so I wasn't aware what was going on. But he said that they all felt him lose the crowd, and that he really didn't regain the crowd for most of the evening. I think he started regaining the crowd when he started talking about the firewalk.
I wonder if it's ever happened before. We certainly have never seen it publicly, have we?
No, which makes this video so powerful, and thank goodness to Butterscotch, because it's almost magical in a way that she had the wherewithal. One person in a crowd of 12,000. We didn't know each other. I didn't have anything to do with her filming that. And I asked her after the fact, I actually asked her, do you have any more? Did you have it from before that? And she was like, no, but when you were standing there, I just knew somehow that I needed to film this, that it was going to be important. And so she did.
She was all the way across the stadium or something?
She was up on a higher tier. She wasn't even on the floor, which is probably good because she got a little, she could get the screen, which is mostly what she's filming is their screen.
That's amazing. And I definitely want to get into that story, and I want to get into really who you are, who Nanine McCool is as a woman, as a human being, as an activist, your story that led to really this powerful moment. And we will dive into that part of the story. I think many of us want to know now. We see this experience with Nanine McCool on a 10-minute video, and certainly there's been now YouTube clips. You've been on Nightline, you've been on Megyn Kelly. We know a little bit, but I want to dive into who is Nanine McCool? Who is that woman that took a stand? Tell us about your story, the activist, and this part of you as a lawyer that stood up to be disbarred, really taking a firm stance in just about everything.
It's important to do that.
What you're saying is you want a dialogue. You
Absolutely.
want to have a conversation. And in order to have actually a conversation that moves us forward, you're going to need multiple sides to that conversation, and we have to be willing to expand our own mindset in order to expand others' mindsets. Is that right?
Well, I've always said, since this started, that the beauty of this discussion is where we disagree. If like Tony Robbins stood up and spoke his truth and people are saying that he owes me an apology, I don't think he does. I think the important thing about this event with Tony Robbins is the discussion that has come from it. And I really would love to see that discussion continue. And I know that you feel that the same way, which is why you invited me on your show, and I'm so grateful.
And you shared with me, it wasn't just one Me Too experiences. You've had multiple Me Too experiences. When did most of those happen? Tell us about that.
I think most women have too many Me Too moments to describe. I probably had my first Me Too moment then when I was 13 and had my first job. But I was in the Coast Guard, and back in the day, there weren't a lot of women in the Coast Guard, and I was in a male-dominated raid. I went into the search and rescue, so I was a small boat crew member, and I eventually became a small boat coxswain, which was the person who ran the search and rescue out on the water and ran the boat and had a crew. And way too many to count. My first duty station was Alaska. There was a huge, even among the population, there's a huge disparity between the ratio of men to women. I think men outnumber women like 20-1, or that was the numbers when I was there. And then in the Coast Guard at the time, in the barracks, it was more like 50-1. So when I would get off work in the evenings and go back to my room in the barracks, there would be 15 guys sitting out there just waiting to talk to me and interact with me. So it was a lot of pressure, and it was heady stuff for an 18-year-old girl, to have that. And those experiences of trying to find the boundaries of what I was comfortable with, when what we're taught so often, particularly if you're a survivor of sexual abuse, as I am, the idea that you get to say no and you need to set your boundaries in a place that makes you safe is not, that's not something that's natural to you. So I had to deal with overt harassment. My first boss, called me Miss Good Body. That was how he referred to me. Here I was like everyone else. I was an E3. I had a job, I had a title, and I never got called Seaman Nyman, which was my maiden name. It was Miss Goodbody, get me a cup of coffee. and there were certainly more serious incidents that were very difficult for me to process. I learned very quickly that speaking up made things worse. That I was punished for saying this person. I had a boss, civilian boss, who essentially called me into his office one Friday morning and said, we're going on a weekend trip, me and a couple other people, and so we're leaving tonight at 6 o'clock, and I want you to be there. And my response was, why? Where are we going? Who's going? And he was essentially letting me know that I was going to go with him, and we were going to have sex, and I had nothing to say about it. And I was stunned, and I just said, no, I'm not doing that. And of course, so from that point on, he punished me, and I tried to complain, and I was told that I was trying to ruin his career. He'd been there for 30 years. He was this well-respected gentleman. He ran this whole department, and who was I to call him out and say that he was doing this thing? I was trying to get ahead in life by calling him out, and it was devastating to me.
So speaking up makes things worse.
Oh, absolutely. I think every woman who's experienced this still experiences that speaking out, even now with the movement, where what Tony Robbins said, that it's too big of a risk to hire an attractive woman. There's so much wrong with that. But that's essentially what he's saying. Women speaking out just pisses everyone off, and so don't do it. And so what's the alternative? What do you get to do? You can't push back, because that just makes people angry. You can't be attractive, because then you can't get the job. So we're supposed to shut up and take it. And that's the message he sent. So, my experience in the Coast Guard was wonderful, but also always tainted by this dynamic that was so insidious that it was very difficult to understand that it was wrong. There was a part of me that didn't like it, but as a survivor and victim of sexual abuse, you're used to that dissonance in your head, right? You're used to the sense that this doesn't feel good, but apparently it's okay.
I'm supposed to do this. There's this
yes.
sort of
I did it. I made it happen. I must have caused this. So
so many women, did you blame yourself?
Oh, absolutely, over and over again. I blamed myself. I struggling through so many incidents. I was at the doctor in Kodiak. I had my pants down around my ankle with this physician, male physician, examining me, and I was not sure why I had to have my pants off, and he asked me out to dinner with my pants down around my ankles. And I was like making excuses why I couldn't just flat out say no. I didn't pull my pants on and tell him off. I made a bunch of excuses why, oh, I thank you so much, but I can't. And then you walk out of that and you're beating yourself up for, oh, what did I do to make him think that was okay? What signal did I send that made him think that I want that? Oh, maybe I hurt his feelings. What's wrong with me? Why am I not flattered that this man wants to take me out? Am I flat? I mean, this whole horrible discussion goes on in your head.
So what I'm hearing, which is my own experience, Me Too is not a moment in time. Me Too is a life-changing experience for a woman destroying her sense of self in an instant and continually questioning herself and everything that happens in her life. Is that right?
Tarana Burke herself says it would be a mistake to see the Me Too movement as a moment. It is many moments. And I think the power for me of when Me Too took off, and it was, Tarana coined the phrase years ago to try and help women connect and know that they shared this experience. But Alyssa Milano tweeted it a year ago or 6 months ago, and the response was overwhelming. And how that affected me was that I was suddenly connected to all these women who the culture as it is isolates us and makes us believe that we did something shameful.
There's something wrong with us.
Yes, and even though we know another woman has experienced it, we think, oh, well, we're both ashamed of it, so let's not talk about it. Let's not connect on that level. Let's try to pretend like everything's great. And that, when Me Too took off, and these women were bravely coming forward and saying, yeah, I had that experience. They didn't name names. They just said, yes, that happened to me. Let me explain to you what happened in one of my jobs. They were deliberately not naming names because of the what happens when you name names. It's so dangerous. And I suddenly felt connected and proud of all these other women and me saying, oh my goodness, I'm not alone. And it's not shameful. I knew it wasn't shameful all along, and here's my validation. It's not shameful. And I just thought I was beyond it. I thought I was way beyond it.
Well, that actually brings up a whole nother thing. You thought you were way beyond it, and the first thing that you did when you left this event was?
Oh, well, when I got home, when I got back from the event and I was safe at home, I kind of fell apart. I did, and it was really brutal. And you know, I like to, as so many women do, like to see myself as very put together, very competent. And I was not put together and competent for like 3 days after I got home, and which was very inconvenient because I left work and I had a lot of work stacking up, and it was very hard. I knew I had to go back to therapy.
Well, what you shared with me I thought was really interesting last night. It was a little bit more of the self-blame, like, shit, thought I had this healed.
Yes.
I thought this was done.
Absolutely.
I thought it was good. It was you know, swept under the rug.
I got this.
I'm
good.
I got this.
I'm a grown woman. I don't do this anymore. And interestingly, I had made a lot of progress in the prior 3 years where I was really in a dark place. And part of that process was being willing, and I think Me Too helped me this as well, to reinforce this idea that I'm tired of being ashamed of being a victim. We've made that word so shameful. And I just decided I wasn't having any more of that. I was going to embrace the victim that I had been, because that's the victim that got me to survive. That's being the victim as a child and learning that role. I survived because I learned how to adapt. I learned how to become what I needed to be to survive. So how can I be ashamed of that? But Tony Robbins, don't live in victimhood. What is that word? What does it mean? I'm so sick of the don't be a victim. I am a victim. I embrace the victim within me because she is a powerful force within me who understands the point is to survive, to live another day. So you do what you have to do. All the things that I had to do with my abuser, who was not a family member. I think it's important to point out that mine wasn't a family member. But I had to do things that I still cringe to remember. But I'm no longer ashamed of it because I survived. And lots of women don't.
That's powerful. And it also mirrors Tony Robbins' experience, because he says he wouldn't be the man he is today if he hadn't had those experiences of being abused when he was a child. So that's very similar to what you're saying. not that you would wish those experiences on anyone, but you had those experiences, and those had an enormous impact on the woman you are today, the woman that had
Right.
the courage to stand up to Tony Robbins.
Absolutely, to deny that we were victims, to be ashamed of that, to say I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. That not only shames us, it shames all the women and girls who don't survive, because they're murdered by their abusers. They are destroyed by their abuse. Their souls are so destroyed because the abuse is so overwhelming that they take their own lives. They lose their lives in substance abuse. We do them a disservice when we say, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. You're shaming those people who are too harmed and too injured by what happens to them to overcome it. And I reject that. I am done with that. I refuse to do that anymore.
The whole movement, honestly, it seems like it's rejecting that as well. And not just rejecting it for nothing, rejecting it for something bigger and better and a solution. So before we go really to focusing on the solution and what can we do with this experience, as on Nightline, Megyn Kelly, they talk about there's an activist in you, an activist that once you left the Coast Guard, you joined the legal profession, and you thought it would be something that you could use for good and to change the world. So please share that experience, because that's part of who Nanine McCool is, and that's part of that woman who stood up.
And so I've always been anti-violence. I can't tolerate it for me. And I volunteered at a shelter, and I was an advocate that went to court with women who were trying to get a protective order. And the first time I went, I'll never forget, I thought, I was like, oh, I'm going to go, and I'm going to hold this woman's hand while she goes through this, because she's very traumatized, and the court's going to give her a protective order because it was so obvious she needed one, because her attacker had bit her in the face, and she literally had his teeth marks in her face. The evidence was on her face. And I was horrified at the way the judge responded, which was essentially to force this woman to stand next to the man who attacked her and bit her face, and tell that woman, next time, don't provoke him. That's what came out of his mouth. Next time, don't provoke him. And I was horrified. And, I eventually decided that I could do a lot of good as an advocate, that if you understood the law, that knowledge was power, and we have good laws. We have excellent laws in this country. And I thought, well, if I know the law, I can go to court and I can help these women. I can educate the judges through my briefs and my arguments and the law, and I can actually help women. And
Were you naive to what the legal system? Were you a little naive to the legal system?
It's a minor understatement. I practice family law. I became an attorney specifically to represent victims of domestic violence, particularly in high conflict custody cases, which there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of beliefs about how that occurs that are just completely wrong. And I suffered from them as well when I first started. And the system is utterly and completely broken. It is so bad, I could spend a day and a half telling you and wouldn't get all of it, and you wouldn't believe me anyway.
So, in this moment, I would believe you, but I think that's a much longer conversation right now.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff I would say it would shock even you.
Interesting. Yeah,
it's really bad.
That's not easy to do.
I would love to see the MeToo movement shine a light in our family court system.
I'm with you on that. So one thing I want to talk about, so you left the legal system, and we don't need to go into a long story, but obviously it was talked about on Megyn Kelly and Nightline briefly.
I didn't really leave.
You didn't leave. Okay. There was a forced leaving of the legal system through what's called disbarment.
Yes.
So, let's just briefly touch on that, because I think it's important, and what's important is that experience, but also what that led to.
So it's interesting, the disbarment has come up now as a means to try and discredit me for whatever reasons in this interaction with Tony Robbins. I find that fascinating. But I do want to point out that what the Louisiana Supreme Court did in disbarring me, on the grounds they disbarred me, was to attack my credibility. And you have to admit, that is evil genius, right? Because I was speaking out against what was going on in the courts. I was speaking out against the abuse of power, the rampant, flagrant abuse of power by judges. And the facts are in the record. If you look at the facts in the record, it's hard to find fault with me. The abuse is so glaringly obvious in the record. But the Louisiana Supreme Court was not interested in that. They were interested in punishing me for speaking out. And so what's the best way to do that? Attack my credibility. So they essentially accused me of lying. I can't find evidence of any lies in that record. And they disbarred me. And they disbarred me without much direction. Normally, you're disbarred for a set number of years, or they'll say you're permanently disbarred. It was unprecedented for someone to be, with me, with no prior disciplinary history, not having been accused of stealing from my clients, not having been accused of any kind of impropriety. The only thing I did was I publicly criticized a pair of judges by saying they should look at the evidence and apply the law before they make a decision in this case. And that was so offensive to them that they disbarred me.
So after that moment, you are a woman who's basically created a whole life around activism and helping others, and now using the legal profession, and it's all gone.
Yeah, I had a problem. I had the luxury of standing on principle, so that I did not have to back down, and I want to acknowledge all the women out there who don't have that luxury because they have to have a job. And I never made a lot of money as an attorney, so I almost did better financially losing my license. But at first I tried to pretend like it didn't bother me. But I realized when I lost my license that I had kind of lost my religion, because my religion was and justice for all. I believed in that. I believed that was the foundation of this country. So when I lost that, I really did lose myself. I was really in a very dark place. For a year, I got out of bed with, what is the point of this? What is the point of living? And the only answer that got me out of bed was my husband, who is wonderful and had just supported me throughout. And I knew that for him, I had to get up and get out of bed.
That's powerful to have a supportive partner like that.
And at 55, or I guess I was 53 at the time, it was like, and what am I going to do next? I'm 53. I'm not a young woman anymore. There's all this ageism on top of sexism that we have to deal with, and ageism, I think, affects men and women also. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with myself. I'm worthless. I really felt worthless.
I think our audience can definitely relate to that. So at that point, what drew you to Tony Robbins? What caused you? You weren't a lifelong follower of Tony Robbins, so what drew you to this moment of showing up there, clicking that button, and...
It's so fascinating with hindsight, because even at the time, so I don't really know, but I think I was looking for inspiration. I normally would not look to someone like Tony Robbins for inspiration, and I normally would not put out what for me is a lot of money to fly across the country to go to this event. It almost was like an obsession. Like one morning I woke up, and there was a little more to it, but it was like I'd seen this ad from Tony Robbins on YouTube, and I couldn't get it out of my head. It was like, why am I obsessing about this? And I just had this overwhelming belief or sudden urge that you've got to go to that event. And I told my husband, I think I'm going to go to this Tony Robbins event. And he was like, really? Okay.
Now she's really lost her mind.
He's like, you need to go because I know you're struggling. I support you. And then I was like, and I think I'm going to buy the most expensive ticket because I want to make sure that I get everything out of it that I can.
And that you did?
He was like, okay, are you taking that out of your savings again? But no, he was totally supportive, but it was unusual. And I had a positive, even before that, I knew who Tony Robbins was, but I had an overall positive impression of him, that he was a good man who really does come from a place of compassion and caring, and so that was, my foundation for it. And I know we talked about this, but it was interesting to me even now that I had done a little bit of research when I decided to do this, but there was a part of me that really didn't want to delve too deep. And maybe it might have been just 2 or 3 days before I actually left to go. I'd already bought my ticket, which is non-refundable unless you go, and you go for it. And they sent me, the Tony Robbins team sends you a bunch of, you get spammed a lot after you sign up. And they sent me something that asked me in a survey, have you seen the documentary, I Am Not Your Guru? And I hadn't. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, but I was really busy. And finally, the week before, 3 or 4 days before, I sat down and watched it. And it was interesting because I normally pay a lot of attention to red flags. I didn't. I saw them, but there was a part of me that was like, no, that's not important. Just go. Just go. And so I went.
And there obviously was a divine moment that you needed to go, but I did watch that I'm Not Your Guru in doing research for this, and I've got to say, I found it reckless. I was very shocked by the man that I saw there, which wasn't the man. The Tony Robbins that I'd been following was not the man that I saw in I'm Not Your Guru. I didn't realize that was his power over that audience, his power of really influencing those minds and being the guru, where people didn't really question him. I didn't see a single person questioning him the way you did.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's interesting about you just reminding me. When he was backing me up in that moment, and he was asking me, why are you pushing back? Why are you pushing back? And I said, first I said that thing about Deepak. I said, Chopra says don't resist. Because I didn't know where he was going, and I was trying to sort of give him an opportunity to show me. And his response was somewhat surprising. He said, I don't give a fuck what Chopra says.
I don't know that came out. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, he said that. He said, I don't really give a fuck what Chopra says, which surprised me. And then he said, I know Chopra. And I said, well, I know that. I knew that. And so when he was pushing me back, and I was struggling to figure out where he was going with this, and he kept asking me, why are you pushing back? Why are you pushing back? And after I said the Chopra thing, he got hostile, and then he kept asking me, and I said, it's in my nature. And I do think that to some degree, pushing back has been empowering to me. When I first learned how to push back, not when I was in my 20s, maybe my late 20s, where I finally started learning, it's okay for you to say, these are my boundaries. Mm-hmm. I might have been in my 30s before I learned to do that. But that was something that had been in me, I think, for a long time. And when I finally did it, it was like, yes, I can do this. This feels right. That other stuff doesn't feel right. Pushing back feels right. I had always questioned. I didn't get my first good conduct medal in the Coast Guard because I questioned. I refused to do something that I thought was wrong, and I stood up to a senior chief, and they masted me. They took me to mast and they disciplined me, and so I didn't get my first good conduct medal, and I was proud of that. Yes, no good conduct medal, yay.
Sounds like a common theme.
Yes, so I've always, it is kind of in my nature to push back, but I think because I have to give that to my mother, who with all her flaws, taught me some essential things, and one of them was stand for something, believe in something, and speak out, because others can't.
Is that the essence of MeToo and the essence of really where you want to see this going?
To me, MeToo is about giving women a voice, a platform to say, this happened to me, mm-hmm. and it happened to me with a lot of people being quiet about it, mm-hmm. so it continues. And so the point of MeToo is to give women a platform. It's not a witch hunt. I think Tony Robbins sort of said some people are using it as a witch hunt, which I think does it a disservice. MeToo, that movement, is shining a light on a culture that is so entrenched that I think even women today, young women mm-hmm. today, they take it as so normal that they don't. And to me, MeToo is an opportunity for us to move on, to shine a light, to change that culture that says women who are attractive, they're not only hurting themselves by being so attractive and speaking out, they're hurting all women, which is very divisive, that message he gave. Very divisive.
And we will go into that next. I want to share, when you stood up to Tony Robbins, you shared, you are an influential man, and you are doing a disservice, in my opinion, to the MeToo movement. And he said to the audience, I am not going to be inauthentic and say I'm sorry about something I'm not sorry about. I'm not sorry. Do you feel, like you said, this is a cultural thing? This is more than Tony Robbins, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Tony Robbins. So he said that in response to somebody in the audience yelling, you just reminded me, that they yelled out, just tell her you're sorry, or just apologize, Tony. And that was what caused him to say that I'm not going to be inauthentic and apologize. No, he genuinely believes that he is coming from a place of right and appropriate. That story about, the outrage in that story, there's so much wrong with the attractive woman example. And he doesn't see it. Instead of conveying a story of, I had a friend and he told me he didn't hire the most qualified candidate because she was an attractive woman, instead of saying, and I called him out and told him, you're part of the problem. Well, Tony Robbins has just expressed to us what a part of what the problem is, and he is part of that problem.
He's an enormous part of that problem.
And he has a platform that is so enormous, and people look up to him and want to be like him for good reason. He has a lot to offer. He is very good at a lot of things, but on MeToo, he doesn't get it, and he's part of the problem. And I would love to see him grow beyond that and evolve in the way that I think he can.
So the exact quote that he said is, I was just with someone the other day, a very famous man, very powerful man, who was saying how stressed he is because he interviewed 3 people that day. 1 was a woman, 2 were men, and the woman was better qualified. But she was very attractive, and he knew, I can't have her around because it's too big of a risk. And he hired somebody else. What I hear there is a complete and total disconnect from who Tony Robbins is as a man, saying that about empowerment and standing up and taking accountability and responsibility. This poor man, and putting it on the woman.
He's so stressed out by those attractive women who are so qualified. It's just ridiculous. And you know what he said before that? He led into that story with, I feel really bad. I feel so sorry. Not for men, for women. So what is that? I feel sorry for women. What message does he send to the women in his audience who were there for inspiration? They'd come to him. There was a mother in that crowd who brought her 17-year-old daughter, and her mom brought her there to get her to hear Tony Robbins because she thought it would help her daughter become empowered. Her daughter was so upset after that interaction between the 2 of us. Mm-hmm. She got up and left and stormed out and demanded. The 17-year-old girl stood up to this man who patronized her, apparently. I wasn't there. Her mom conveyed this to me. About, oh, you're just tired. You go home and rest. You'll feel better tomorrow. Come back tomorrow. And it just, to me, it's just so typical. Oh, you don't really know what you mean. You don't really know what you think. Let me tell you what you think, and then just come back tomorrow and just pick up from there. I mean, she said it was so infuriating to her daughter, and I'm so impressed with that young woman that she had the wherewithal, she had the courage. She inspires me. She makes me realize I need to keep speaking out, and I need to keep encouraging this conversation because it inspires her, and then we can inspire others.
So that brings up a really interesting point. Where are these men? They're influential men all over the place. The 12 he mentioned, the brands, the advertisers, the sponsors of Tony Robbins and events like this that perpetuate this myth. Where are they, and why aren't they taking a stand? Why aren't they pulling their advertising back? Why aren't they putting real empowered women?
Question. I love that question, and I hadn't thought of it, but it's a wonderful question. Why aren't more of the sponsors, and there are lots, I won't name names, but there are plenty of sponsors there plastered all over the place, coming up on the big screens in little flashes. Why aren't they speaking out? Why aren't they saying, we don't want to be a part of this culture? It's a great question. And maybe, your watchers can, because this movement has to be, we all have, for it to be successful, people have to realize that they all have a power, they have a power within them. Just like Tony Robbins.
The power. Unleash the power within.
Tony Robbins unleashed
the
power within me. I don't think it was what he expected, but I think we all have that, and it appears in different ways, and we all have something to offer. And I think it's a great question. Where are these sponsors? What your own struggles with this piece and.
Yeah, for full disclosure, we reached out to a number of sponsors, and we were told it was too political to touch. It's too political. It's too political.
Women having a voice, women not having to be treated like objects at work, women being treated for their skills and their competency rather than whether or not how attractive they may or may not be. And how can that be political? And if it is political, then why aren't you on the right side of it?
Very good point. And I think the other point is, there are a lot of brands out there spouting women's empowerment. Almost everyone is jumping on this women's empowerment bandwagon, but something like this is too political. So how does that work? There's a massive disconnect between spouting empowerment and walking it. And I got news for you. Forever Fierce Media sponsored this because it was so important to keep this conversation going, to keep a spark under this. It isn't about Tony Robbins, but Tony Robbins opened a door to a powerful conversation that we hope will continue, because we have an opportunity, don't we, for massive change out of this moment in time.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful to have had this role in being a part of this movement, but I am a moment in this movement, and there are plenty other moments that we need. And so for me, the conversation that got started is a wonderful conversation, and I just want to see it keep going. And that means that it takes place in all the places where there aren't cameras, or where, not on social media. It takes place in homes, amongst family members, between, as you talk to your young men and you talk to your young women, and what MeToo is, and it takes place in training and corporations. The conversation is so important, and I hope that this inspires a lot of women to start those conversations, because that's the strength of the movement. That's where we'll change. And to engage with people who disagree with you, obviously in a safe setting and in a safe way, but that's where the learning is, where people disagree. And I've learned a lot from a lot of men who've reached out to me to say, this is why I don't agree with the Me Too movement. This is what I'm afraid of. This is how I see it. And those have been fascinating discussions, even though sometimes they're really uncomfortable, because I want to say, oh, you just don't get it.
Well, I think, anytime we have change, it's uncomfortable. And that's the whole point. I think Tony Robbins, it's a big part of what he teaches, right? Get out of your comfort zone, stay in that ego part. In order to change, you have to be uncomfortable.
I absolutely think, I'm so grateful to Tony Robbins for being authentic. Before I went there, I had tremendous respect for the courage that he shows in stepping out into those programs like that, and he puts himself out there. He does do everything he can to be authentic, in a fairly heavily scripted piece that he does, but he's still very much him. So in his authenticity, he gave us this discussion. And because Butterscotch had the wherewithal to video it, it was almost like we were all brought together, but we were all important to it. It wasn't one of us.
All pieces of the puzzle.
We were all essential to it. And I think that's another part of the movement, that everyone is a part of this movement. And we need women and men to get involved in this movement, to have these discussions, to be committed to changing a culture that currently is toxic to women and young girls.
Nanine, do you believe that we live in a world that's dominated by a male power elite?
Yeah, I think it's kind of obvious. Who's the president of the United States? Who's the president of most of the free world? Who's in our Congress? It's disproportionately white, wealthy men. So I think, yeah, that's kind of obvious.
Do you believe we can change this mindset, and how do we do it?
Well, anything's possible, but we can't take it for granted. The change is not going to happen by itself. And it is possible to go backwards, but I don't want us to go backwards. This movement depends on everyone becoming involved and shining a light and asking questions and being able to go to uncomfortable places themselves. So yes, do I want it to change? Do I think it's possible? Yes, but let's not be complacent about it.
And I agree with you. And Tony Robbins, I have a few words for you, because everything happens not to you, but for you. So this moment actually happened for you. And I personally was very upset, or it was hard for me to see the posting on the Facebook page and the PR release there, and then the private replies that ended up just going on Facebook Messenger with a sales pitch to bring people into the Tony Robbins experience.
Bad form.
Bad form.
Really bad form.
I see this as an amazing opportunity, as do you. So what would you like Tony Robbins and these men to do from here to affect change and move the movement forward rather than going backward?
Tony Robbins has tremendous influence and power in these circles. So I would like to see him use that to change the discourse that goes on in those boardrooms that we don't know about. But before he can do that, he has to change his own discourse. So I think he should hang out with Tarana Burke and some of the leaders of the Me Too movement, like immerse himself. He talks about your peer group, right? You become the people you hang out with. yo, Tony, look at your
Tony.
peer group.
You might want to.
And you might want to surround yourself with really powerful women who have not spent their life in the spotlight or with tremendous privilege, but have been doing this really, he talks about service. Well, Tarana Burke spent her life serving women of color and trying to ensure that they received resources that are deprived them simply because of their socioeconomic status and the color of their skin. So he needs to hang out with those people and understand what it is to be a woman the best way he can as a large white privileged male. He needs to surround himself with that to even have an inkling. And then once he's done that for 6 months or a year, if he hasn't changed then maybe he can't. But I think he can. I think he has it in him. I think he wants to. I looked in his eyes, and I think I saw in there a man who wants to be better.
So Tony Robbins, you want to be better, and I would imagine that means all the men surrounding you actually want to be better, and we're giving you an opportunity to be better. So you can come on this show, you can talk to us. Tarana Burke, I'm sure she would love to have a conversation. I want to speak for her, but we need to move this movement forward. We need massive change, and this was an opportunity that happened not to you, but for you. So let's use it for good and for change. Thank you for being on our show today. And thank you for tuning in to Forever Fierce. Join our community. Nanine McCool actually just joined the Forever Fierce Revolution and is in the process, clearly, of reinvention here. I think you found your new passion and your new purpose, sister.
Hey.
Bring it.
Bring it. Thank you.
And as far as brands and advertisers, you can contact us as well. I think it's time to not just spout women's empowerment, but actually walk the walk of women's empowerment. We have an enormous community here between MeToo, between Forever Fierce. There are amazing women out there, empowered women that would love to partner with you for real change. And this isn't political. This is meaningful and a conversation that must continue. Thank you. Cheers, beauties. Stay fierce.